me, oh, the great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land.
Okay, well, it's good to be here, and I always enjoy getting to meet some new people and hear some teaching. So some of my thoughts and perspectives from growing up, I'd like to share a few of those. And Dad and I did not compare notes, and so some of this is going to be a little overlapping. I don't usually do this, but I wrote my thoughts down, and I'm planning to read them because I'm a very sporadic speaker that often gets on rabbit trails, and we don't have time for rabbit trails today, although sometimes those can be interesting, but it don't do good at saving time. So I'm just going to read this and hope this makes sense, but what were some of the dynamics, either in place or out of place? I'm not going to preach to you a sermon, as Dad is doing just fine with that. I'm going to try my best to highlight some key points, events, concepts, and life directions that impacted me. I find it hard sometimes to know what impacted me in life. In a lot of ways, I did not analyze all these things while I was growing up. But next thing I knew, I was grown up. Well, maybe, if you want to call it that. So, here we go. Know your destination. One aspect as I look back and analyze our lives that I think is very important. You must know your destination. I remember so many times in our family life where Dad kept pointing us back to the goal, and we worked hard to keep that in front of us. We didn't live our lives like unwilling robots that did what they were asked because they have to. We were part of a team. Quote, if you don't know where you are going, any road will lead you there. So just think about that. If you don't know where you're going, then any road will lead you to where you don't know where you are going. Does that make sense? Okay, good. It didn't. If you don't know where you're going, any road will lead you there. So if you don't know where you're going, then any road will lead you to where you don't know where you're going. So all this to say, know your destination. Thank you. I think it made sense. So how true that is in our Christian lives. How many times in our lives do we run with absolutely no clue as to what God is calling us to, or how he would want us to live life? Dad very deliberately charted a clear course for us of how we were to practically walk out our Christian life and work hard to help us understand the end goal and how the little choices make such a big difference. Living the Christian life, trying to follow Christ's principles in every aspect of our daily lives. So serving the Lord with the joy of being able to serve the Lord. For a couple of examples, I remember a couples night that our local fellowship was putting on. It was intended not only for the enrichment of the church couples, but also as an outreach for the community. I was the oldest of my siblings at home for this particular year, being 14 or 15. Me and my younger siblings had 6 or 8 children brought to our house in our care during the couples night, including 2 of them being local community children that the parents wanted to go. We had the children in our care until 10 o'clock that evening, and what was on my mind throughout that evening was, I hope the parents from the community could be blessed that night and pointed to Christ. All about understanding the end goal. This was before I was born again. There were other times that we would give pony rides to 30 or 40 children at our house, running with them so they could gallop and have a good time, running until your lungs were ready to burst and it felt like your legs were ready to fall off. I'm not going to make it sound like I was 100% enthused every single time. However, I did understand some of the value that it brought for eternity, and that made it a lot easier. Roads lead somewhere. Dad was always very tuned in to where something could lead. So here, I did really mean it when I told you I'm not going to preach to you. This is probably the closest I'm going to get to preach, but it's only to portray my point, so please forgive me. I've been thinking lately about Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So we all know what sin is. Sin is often easily identifiable, as the Bible has so many clear teachings on sin. But what about weight? Do we know what a weight is? A weight in the context of our lives is anything that hinders or slows us down from getting to the finish line. All right, did you hear that? Anything that slows you down. So many people, and especially youth, ask, what is wrong with it? Or, show me in the Bible where this is sin. These are entirely the wrong questions. We need to be asking, does this help me reach my end goal? Does this help me reach my end goal in life? And will this help me to get where God wants me to go? I remember so clearly, so often, the answer Dad would give us when we wondered about doing something or wanted to go somewhere was, it's not that in it of itself is sin, but I have seen too often where it leads to and ends up. We all have seen the two opposites to this approach. All right, I'm going to repeat what Dad would tell us. It's not that in it of itself is sin, but I have seen too often where it leads to and ends up. So we've all seen the two opposites to this approach. Seems like it is either one extreme or the other. So one extreme is, it's sin, it's wrong, you can't do that. End of discussion. That's one extreme. Okay, the other is, well, I can't really say it's wrong, so I guess it might be okay. I've seen so many times when these either generate young people that are bitter and disillusioned to what sin is because every unwise thing in their lives was called a sin when it really wasn't, or young people that say it's only about me and Jesus, and they don't consider their parents, church fellowship, and other authorities in their life. Either of these can very easily end up in an unwise direction that leads away from Christ. I keep trying to go on rabbit trails. I'm not going to right now. All right, Dad's teaching. Dad was not one to preach his sermons. It was a common conversation for us to talk about the way our decisions, choices, and actions would affect people towards or away from Christ. It wasn't through endless preaching that he taught us. It was through life. He always tried to help us understand why we were doing what we were doing, and always tried to have Christ the center of our decisions. Dad had my heart. I didn't want to go against him most of the time in my life. This was a huge help to me as it gave me such a security in sorting through decisions as I got older. I remember as a young man of 16 or 17, life was very busy. There was a lot of opportunities around that we could have gotten involved in. Foreign mission field, local evangelism, Bible schools, etc. At this time in my life, Dad was wanting me to stay around home, keep our little farm going, as well as do some odd jobs and help out with regular family ministries that always showed themselves. I was at the point where I really wanted to do something for the Lord. I was born again, had a heart for the Lord, wanted to serve him at all costs. I badly wanted to do something important, something big. I was a little perturbed at the time because I felt like I was being squelched. Dad was hindering me from serving the Lord, right? No. I was having a hard day of it and really crying out to God as to what he would have me do. I was in the middle of hauling about 20 buckets of water at the time. As I was loading the buckets of water into a truck, I very clearly heard the voice of the Lord saying, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that bucket, I want you to pick it up, and I want you to put it on the back of the truck. You know, what a load rolled off my shoulders, because all of a sudden I knew what God wanted me to do. He wanted me to follow my dad. He wanted me to be under authority. So there I was, doing exactly what God wanted me to do. And the blessing of being under authority. And that's the will of God. And it's so freeing to know when you are following what God wants you to do. And it didn't have to be all these, quote, big things, but preparing me for later. So what kept me as a young man? We had outside teenagers in our home for over half my teenage years. I had peers in our church when I was 14 to 18 who were sneaking cigarettes and beer, sneaking movies behind their parents' backs, lying, cheating, stealing. We spent time with these folks. We interacted with them on a regular basis. A vivid memory I would like to point out. I remember Dad having meetings with the parents of some of the youth in the above category. That left all the children by themselves the entire evening. He didn't chase us down. We, on our own, had to come check with him every 15 minutes throughout the entire evening. That evening, it was 15 minutes and not 20. He didn't chase us down. We, on our own, had to come check in just to say hi. And I'm sure that he observed much more than we realized at the time. And he would often ask us how it was going. I also remember the involvement that Dad had in these boys' lives. They were not scared of him, although he drew some hard lines. We did lots of things with them as a family, including Dad, which brought interaction with them, which brought a relationship, which helped him to guide us because he knew what was going on. So I didn't realize Dad was going to do all the slides there, so I'm sure you know by now that we are normal people that have normal lives, and we have jobs and everything is normal. We definitely weren't always reading our Bible and passing out tracts all the time. We were often too busy in other ministry areas, I think, in a lot of ways. But I did want to just share a few stories and memories growing up, just to talk, and maybe we've heard a lot of heavy stuff, and so hopefully this will give you something else to think about for a few minutes here. But we had a lot of fun. We lived a fast-paced life. Anything from hunting, fishing, 45-foot high swings, and horseback riding, to traveling to preach somewhere, babysitting, or having large crowds at our house. A very fun time for us boys was growing up with a Suzuki Sidekick. How many know what a Suzuki Sidekick is? All right, it's a little SUV that's about not much longer than that. No, two-door, and I'm exaggerating, but it's a tiny little SUV. This was one amazing farm vehicle. Canvas top that didn't hold out the water. One headlight from another vehicle that we mounted on with OSB. No mirrors, stick shift, and what do you know? It was four-wheel drive. And best of all, we didn't pay anything for it because the neighbor gave it to us for an exchange for riding his pony for a few months. Oh, and I forgot to mention, only had one brake. Now, this was not only a brake, but it was the front wheel. So just imagine with me, almost a mile back a logging road on a little trail behind our house, and it had just rained the night before, and we have this thing loaded down with firewood. Coming down a hill so steep, first gear, low range, RPMs up to 5,000, and you don't know what else to do but to use the brake. So you just touch the brake. And that one amazing front wheel takes your vehicle, slides it sideways off the road, and slams you into a tree. But even more fun than this was taking our deacon's wife on a ride in it. Definitely making for some funny noises and shrieks coming from the passenger seat. How about horseback riding? So I had a horse I was training for 2 weeks, a bad bucker. Finally got it to where it was doing pretty well. I trusted her pretty long way. After a long ride, we were nicely walking along. I was relaxed, horse was relaxed, had loose rein, head was down. Next thing I knew, I was sitting on the ground under its nose. Happened so fast, I never felt it coming. Or what about riding your horse backwards? Add some spice to your life, right? So after getting that down pat pretty well, I decided it was time to step it up a notch and go from the forward position to the rear-facing position while the horse was at a gallop. Halfway through my precarious maneuver, I fell smack into the fence beside me. Never really knew what happened. Still shocked I didn't break any bones. And after that, I stuck to the right way of riding horse. They're designed to ride forward and not backwards. Rabbit trails. Here we go. So, two things Dad was accused of probably the most of my growing up years. One was being too strict and not letting us do anything. And the other is having so many guidelines and rules. Being too strict, not letting us do anything, The other is having no rules and boundaries, and we could do whatever we wanted to do. Okay, tell me how that lines up, okay? You can do anything you want with no rules, or it's so strict and tight you can't do anything. That's what I grew up in. Talk about confusing. I'm a very confused child because of that. But, it was interesting. I remember times with my friends, and I'm just going to make up a scenario. So let's just say we were at the house, and they wanted to maybe go on a walk and, let's say, walk onto the neighbor's property. And we'd say, well, no, we're not allowed to do that. Well, let's check. You mean your dad said you can't? Oh, no. Well, then why can't you? Well, he doesn't want us to. Well, that means you can. Well, no, we're not allowed to. So you mean you can't step 1 foot over there before you ask your dad? Well, let's just ask Dad. So no, it wasn't a rule. It wasn't, there were so many things like that where it was not like a rule, a law of thou shalt not step 1 foot off the property without asking Dad, if somebody needed help over there, better believe it, we were there. We didn't ask about that. We talked about it later. There's so many things like that with life where wasn't a lot of hard set rules, but knowing the heart and being able to portray that and live by that. So just in closing here, we all know the common saying, behind every great man is a great woman. And so I just want to take the time to point out my dad had a great woman behind him on his journey, and I had a great mom to walk with us in growing up. Mom always took time to notice our little insignificant joys, and she was always supportive to Dad. And also like to say that I'm headed towards being a great man. It's nothing of what I've done, but thanks to the Lord Jesus Christ and everything he's done for me, and also the help of my darling wife that God has blessed me with so richly.
This old couple was sitting on the front porch, and she said, you know what would taste good? He said, what's that? Strawberry milkshake. And he said, I'll run down the corner and get us one. Write it down. No. Write it down. No. He goes down and talks to several people on the way down. When he got down, he could not remember what she asked for. He tried his best. He was embarrassed and finally he said, well, I know she likes hamburgers. So he took 2 big hamburgers home, set it in front of her, and she went through them a little bit, and she said, see there, I told you to write it down. You forgot the onions and the pickles. Now, when you both forget, well, that's kind of bad. Well, I tell you what, we always enjoyed coming in with Freeman's. I spent a lot of time on the floor with those children, and we had good times together. And I always was impressed with Freeman's way of his how quiet spoken his children responded. I don't think Freeman ever had to holler at his children to get a response. And it was just a blessing to see the respect he had at a very young age and the trust. And that's very crucial. There's so many children grow up without that security that comes with firm discipline. And my heart cries out as I see children are longing for that security. And that goes for all kinds of headship, parents and ministers, that simply firm, godly leadership. And, that confidence kind of rides over sometimes. One time I was on the floor, and Christy, as a little girl, was sitting on Freeman's lap, and I was coming towards her like a bear, growling. And she knew I wasn't going to hurt her, but she came up with a real good one. She said, Grandpa, can you go read? She thought that'd be a lot better but for me to read than to be playing like a bear. But we had a lot of interesting things. And as Freeman, one of his strong points was, very strong teaching was, he believed that any kind of pouting is a form of disrespect, a form of disrespect. Is that what I want? And then I heard a story about his youngest, Ryan. He wanted to go hunting one day, and Freeman said, "We've got this work to do first. It has to be done, and I won't have time to go hunting afterwards." And Ryan, in his way of being taught, he joyfully went ahead and worked. No pouting. He worked, and he got his job done. He was a little bit late to go hunting, but he said, "I'm going to go ahead and try it anyhow." He jumped the pickup, drove down to an old place with an old barn, and a lot fence was around it. And there's some leaves there, so he kicked the leaves away so he could stand there and move around when deer come out. They wouldn't hear him move. And as he kicked those leaves away, a buck in the woods heard him do that and thought there was another buck out there making scrape. And walked out to check on the other buck right in front of Ryan. He got his shot his deer and went home. And I thought, you know what? That was one way that the Lord blessed for his faithfulness. Just simply, the Lord he got that deer so easy. God sent it out to him. And it's just been, yes. And I'm glad that, it's really a blessing to see young fellows like Freeman. I appreciate seeing the baton passed down generation to generation. I tell you what, that is a blessing. That is really a blessing. We only have 3 children. We have 20 grandchildren and 49 great-grandchildren. When Christy had her little one last fall, we got to hold it number 48, and had one since that. And my new wife, Clara Ann, she has about the same amount. She's going to bypass me quite a bit on the great-grandchildren after a while because she has a lot more younger grandchildren. But yes. Now, one thing I have noticed that with Freeman's teaching, and it's all right, it's good, everybody loves to hear it, like to hear it. But there's so many people can hear it and never do anything about it. Isn't that sad? It's so easy just to take the easy road and not really put ourselves into it. And I've seen that too much. It saddens me that not everyone can see that or is willing to really make some changes and adjustments, whatever it takes. And so now I'm going to like to tell a little story that I read about. A little child, I think maybe 2 years old, wandered off one evening towards dark, and they realized pretty quickly that they had to have some help, got people help together, and they looked for that little child. And there was some tall grass field close by, and that little child simply disappeared, and they tried desperately to find it. And finally, way late, towards morning, they decided the whole group that came out, let's join hands and walk through this grass. And so they joined hands and walked through the grass. It was quite a pretty cool evening. They walked through the grass and found the body of the lifeless child. And the parents cried, why didn't we join hands sooner?
Amen. Amen.
And I tell you what, why can't we learn to join hands sooner? And like Freeman said, people won't listen until it's too late, then they cry for help. Why not cry for help early on? Why not join hands? I tell you, there's a lot more at stake than money. And we stayed at Clara Ann's grandson's place. And up in the bathroom, they had a little motto: if you want to change the world, go home and love your children. That's all I need to say. Lord bless you.
Guide me, oh, the great Jehovah, pilgrim through these bars.